You're tuning into AWANI Global with me, Nailah Huda. And at this hour, we want to take a close look at the recent EU-ASEAN Business Sentiment Survey, which shows that ASEAN remains the top region for European companies, even ahead of India and China. Malaysia emerged among the top 4 most attractive markets alongside Vietnam, Indonesia and Thailand. But while this optimism is high, there are still some concerns, especially over the slow regional integration and trade barriers, among others. And with the EU-ASEAN Business Summit just a few days away, we want to unpack some of these key findings with Chris Humphrey, Executive Director of the EU-ASEAN Business Council, joining us now from Singapore. Thank you, Chris, for joining us today on AWANI Global.
Thank you, Nailah, for having me on.
So a lot to unpack, of course, with the EU-ASEAN Business Sentiment Survey. But I think one of the most interesting one is, of course, it shows ASEAN is, again, ranked as offering the best economic opportunities for European companies for now 3 years running, if I'm not wrong. And this places ASEAN ahead of India and China. What do you think drives this sort of consistent confidence in ASEAN?
Well, I think you look at the region as a whole, it has so much to offer for European businesses. First of all, it's a region which will soon be the 4th largest economy in the world, taken collectively. It is the world's 3rd largest workforce as well. We have increasing rates of middle-class growth in the region, and middle-class growth means a lot more demand for things like white goods and cars, etc. And high rates of urbanization as well. Couple all of that with ASEAN as a bloc being involved in many, many trade arrangements like RCEP, etc. And then its geographical position. I think all of this makes the region a place where European businesses want to come, they want to trade with, and they want to invest in.
Of course, we want to talk about ASEAN, but I do want to briefly take a quick look at Malaysia because the survey shows Malaysia has now joined the ranks of Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand as one of the top 4 most attractive ASEAN markets for European businesses. What do you think are some of the factors that make Malaysia stand out and now joining the ranks with these top 4 most attractive markets?
Well, the other 3 I think are quite simple. Singapore, Vietnam have FTA in place with Europe. That makes them very attractive. Indonesia, of course, is a huge market. I think for Malaysia, the key thing is you have an administration there which has made it clear they're open for business, they're looking to make investments. They are looking to make some reforms as well to make investments easier. Malaysia's position within ASEAN, Malaysia has always been seen as a proponent of ASEAN regional integration. I think that helps as well. You have the land and you have the people. And you also then have pretty good connectivity. And if we're going to be honest about life, you have a lower cost base than someone like Singapore as well, but you have the talent to match and you have the connectivity to match. And I think that's very, very important for European businesses.
Now, another statistic that I found in the survey says that while 73% of European firms say ASEAN has become more important to their global revenues, the percentage of companies that are planning to increase trade and investment, however, has fallen from 86% to 71%. What do you think could explain this sort of dip? Well,
first thing to say is the survey was done this year. The collecting period for data was April and May. So we were at the height then of tariff uncertainty coming out from Washington, D.C., where large parts of the region were being threatened with very high tariff rates. I think that sense of instability clearly didn't help when we were collecting the data, and firms were obviously in a mode of, let's hold on to our cash, let's hold on to keep our powder dry and see which way the wind is blowing before we make some decisions. I think the other part of it is as well, we had a very high number last year for saying they intended to expand their trade and investments in the region. Some of that investment and some of that trade expansion already happened. So I think we actually expect a bit of tailoring off for a while as businesses see how that increase in trade and investment is progressing.
You mentioned that it's partly due to the timing of the survey of it all, with the US tariffs, of course, being a huge factor there. But I think now that we've come into a few months of the US tariffs being in place, there's still, of course, a lot of back and forth, still a lot of confusion there. But do you think that this could potentially increase the interest from European companies?
I think what we've seen this year in the world, and it's not just US trade policy, there are a number of conflicts which are having impacts way beyond their borders as well. Still a little tension between the US and China. All of that, I think, makes ASEAN more attractive. And as businesses are looking to reposition supply chains and give themselves some alternatives, again, that makes the region attractive. We're not out of the woods yet with tariffs by any means. Yes, we have greater clarity over what the headline rates are across the region, 19% for Malaysia. But who knows what happens tomorrow morning? And there's a whole bunch of other things out there, the Section 232 tariffs, etc. Still sitting there, and we're still waiting to see what happens. And we're still waiting for a US-China deal to be finalized.
Apart from tariffs, the survey also highlights a growing concern about rising non-tariff barriers, specifically 58% of respondents compared to 40% last year. Can you perhaps give some examples of what these barriers are actually, and how are they impacting European businesses on the ground? What's it like on the day-to-day?
Yes, and this is a problem for the region, and it's one that does need to be addressed, I'm afraid. Within ASEAN, where we have a bloc which is looking to do regional economic integration, we still have 10 different regimes when it comes to standards, when it comes to testing, etc. And that means companies are faced by complexities. So, I don't know, a brake pad going into Malaysia would have to conform to a different set of testing standards when it goes into Indonesia or Thailand. And this adds cost and complexity. In some parts of the region, we also have non-automatic import licenses. So you have to apply to get an import license, wait for it to be signed before you can import your goods without any clarity or certainty as to when that would happen. And again, that adds complexity. And I think the other one is, and it does come out in the survey again, is customs procedures. Whilst the numbers saying they are acceptable has increased, with still a large chunk who say there's much room to make them more speedy and efficient.
I mean, I think the consistent theme, the pattern here goes back to the, sorry, I think the pattern here really boils down to the issue of economic integration, the whole question of regional integration. If you've mentioned this in another interview before, you talked about the slow integration across ASEAN. You talked about the regulatory inconsistencies, as you say. I mean, that's a barrier on a day-to-day basis. And that sort of holds the region back from its full potential. What do you think are some of the specific reforms or actions that European companies would like to see from ASEAN governments?
Well, we saw back in May, under Malaysia's chairmanship, the release of a new ASEAN strategic plan for economic integration. That gives us hope. It gives us hope because it's very clear, it's very precise in what they want to try and achieve in the region. We now need to convert that into action. So whilst the political masters, the leaders and the trade ministers are saying, this is what we need to do, and I think issues coming out from Washington this year have made them realize we need to put greater impetus behind this. We need to convert that into action, and so that political will needs to drip down to the officials in the front line. The people are actually processing the permits, doing the clearances, organizing the standards. It's not an easy process, and to be fair to ASEAN, I think they have perhaps promised a bit too much in the past, but it isn't easy. And if I look at the European Union, where there is a true single market, even that is not 100% perfect. And Europe's been doing it now for 40 odd years. ASEAN's been trying to do this now for 15, 16, 17 years. It does take time. It requires change in domestic legislation in many cases. And you've got 10 countries got to do that with their own political issues internally to deal with and their own domestic industries to look after.
I mean, as you said, the EU has got a lot more decades of experience in this, and it's, you know, it's not easy. Of course, ASEAN's still rather a baby in this matter and trying to integrate as a single market. But what do you think are some of the biggest bottlenecks to really achieving this deeper integration? Maybe some lessons that could be shared from the EU?
Well, EU is a different beast to ASEAN to start with. EU has a centralized government in Brussels, and therefore it's much easier to do things. So countries have willingly given up some sovereignty. That's never going to happen in ASEAN, nor would we advise them to do so. What it requires is turning the political statements into real action on the ground, and realizing that working collectively for the greater good is a thing to do. Otherwise, it's like having 10, 11 footballers on the pitch playing their own game of football rather than passing to each other.
Now, I do want to, I guess, look at this from a more optimistic side of things. Now, what do you think are some ASEAN sectors or industries that you see are the most promising for European investment for the next 5 years?
Great question. I think in the area of energy transition, where actually ASEAN collectively and individually, the countries are making great progress. That's a huge one. I think Europe can play a significant role in that, both in terms of funding and financial support, but also in terms of practical support on the ground, whether it's support for grid systems, the ASEAN power grid, etc. The other area, of course, I think is more and more in high-tech manufacturing as well. And we see that with a number of our members looking to do more in the region, right? In the semiconductor space, in the electric vehicle space as well. These are big areas, I think, for ASEAN. And there are other areas, perhaps lower down the food chain, where there is scope to do more. And I think one area which we shouldn't ignore, perhaps, is also agricultural products.
You did mention a little bit about energy, and that just sort of rings this bell of sustainability in my mind, and it does bring me to this recent report. I hope it's okay to ask about the EU recently recognizing the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil MSPO certification as credible standard that can facilitate compliance with EU's new deforestation regulation, and there's been progress on the Indonesian side as well. Just some thoughts on this. Do you think this is good progress?
I think it's excellent progress, and I must say Malaysia should be commended for the progress it's made with the standards. We've had many discussions in the past with the Minister for Plantations in Malaysia, and we've been very supportive of them. Actually, we've been pushing the Commission quite hard to give Malaysia in particular the due credence that it needs and continue to support them. My understanding is that MSPO actually goes way beyond what the European deforestation regulation is looking for. I think the Indonesians have been making strides forward as well. The good news in all of this, the disputes that were there, if you went back 2, 3, 4, 5 years around palm oil, seem to have calmed down. And I think that's really good news for EU-ASEAN relations.
I did also mention a little bit on Indonesia, and there's a lot of news reports as well stating that the EU and Indonesia have finalized a trade agreement that's due to be signed next week in Bali, but this is coming from a senior minister in Indonesia. Any thoughts on this as well? Another positive step towards better trade relations?
It's excellent news. Next week, they will be announcing the completion of the negotiations. The formal signing won't happen until next year. But it's excellent. After almost 10 years of negotiation, we finally got to the finish line with Indonesia. It is the biggest market in Southeast Asia. It's been a difficult relationship, let's be honest, between the two sides. But we've got there, and it's great news. And hopefully it then heralds a new era of increased and more rapid negotiations for the other FTAs which are on the table, which of course includes Malaysia.
Where do you think the Washington tariffs come into play in all of this? Do you think, as you said, this was a sort of impetus for both sides to sort of accelerate the talks?
Yes, I do. I think there's certainly a factor of that in there. If the US is not playing ball with the rest of the world needs to play ball with each other. US is only about 15% of the global trade. The other 85% is up for grabs. It makes sense, certainly makes sense for Europe to looking to diversify its own supply chains and its own partnerships. And I think for any country here in Southeast Asia, none of them want to be put in a position of having to choose sides. So they want to have as many friends as possible. So doing deals with Europe makes perfect sense.
I think we've covered a lot on what ASEAN has done and what ASEAN can do, but you've also called for stronger engagement on the EU side. How do you think, or how do you assess, I guess, the EU's current level of engagement in ASEAN compared to other major partners like the US and China? Do you think that Europe is lagging, and if so, where are some areas of improvement that could be done?
I think if you asked me that question 3-4 months ago, I'd have said, yes, Europe needs to do a lot more with the region. We need more engagement at more senior level, particularly from European commissioners. Ask me that question now. We've just come off the back of an ASEAN Environment Ministers meeting where we had 2 European commissioners turning up, and that is unprecedented and extremely welcomed by the European business community. Next week, the European Trade Commissioner will be in KL for the ASEAN Economic Ministers meeting. Also extremely good news. And I know other commissioner visits are planned coming up this year. I think Europe has realized under the previous van der Leyen Commission, which finished office at the end of last year, they perhaps weren't engaged enough with the outside world. Pressures, other pressures, plus US tariff policy as well, means that this current commission is much more outward looking and knows it needs to work with friends, and it sees ASEAN as a friend.
You said that you might have had a different opinion 4 months back, but do you think that the stronger engagement now comes at a good time, or did it come a little bit too late?
Certainly, the Business Council would have preferred a lot more engagement a lot earlier. But I think now is a good time. It's not too late, and they are definitely stepping up their game for us.
Now, we do want to talk, of course, about the upcoming EU-ASEAN Business Summit in just a couple of days. It does come at a time of shifting global trade alignments, of course. Nothing's certain these days, but what do you think are some of the key themes and the priorities on the agenda this year?
For us on the agenda this year, key things are how we can work with the region about driving forward energy transition, both in the financing of it and the practical connections that need to be put in place. Another one actually is looking at food security and making sure we have safe, accessible and nutritious food for the region. Large parts of the region, unfortunately, do suffer from malnutrition and stunting. And we also, of course, on the flip side, have high obesity levels. So we need to talk about how we can make sure people are getting the right food and can live healthy lifestyles and contribute more economically. And then finally, digitalization. And this is the big thing for the region. ASEAN is working on their own framework agreement to cover digital economy. It's a huge growth there with massive potential for Southeast Asia. And people in the region are pretty technically savvy. There are a lot of digital startups and unicorns in Southeast Asia. And I really think if we can get it right here, ASEAN can really be driving digital economy further, not just in the region, but globally.
You stressed on digitalization, and as you said, people are rather tech savvy here, but do you think that there's a sort of disconnect in how we operate on a day-to-day basis, how we use our phones for everything, but when it comes to businesses, when it comes to trade, there's still that sort of disparity, in how we operate our customs, perhaps. Not everything is digitalized.
Customs is a problem, and customs, in our view, should be going entirely paperless across the region, with just digital interactions, both for your declarations and your permits and your permissions, and for paying any customs duties or tariffs as well. All of that should be completely automated. I think we as individuals are a lot more digitally connected than many governments are in the region. There's certainly scope for improvement there. But to be fair, everyone is moving in the right direction. Some are moving a bit quicker than others. But the willingness is there, and the knowledge that we have to do it is there as well.
Going back to the summit, how do you think this summit will address some of the concerns that's being raised in the survey, looking particularly at issues of non-tariff barriers and the slow regional integration, as you said?
Well, we have both business leaders and we have policymakers and ministers from across the region attending the summit, speaking at the summit. We think there will be good, diverse conversations happening, not just among the panels and between the panels and the audience, but on the sidelines of it as well. It's a chance for business leaders, both from Europe and from ASEAN, to get together and meet, discuss their problems and opportunities, but also then to interact with policymakers. Hopefully it will lead to some change.
Talking about change, you did say that you want to see more concrete action, especially when it comes to regional integration. Beyond dialogue, how do you think the Council can help turn some of this positive sentiment into concrete action and, of course, cents and dollars, right, into investment for European business in ASEAN?
Well, our job at the Council is to advocate for the interests of European businesses. We do that with direct conversations with ministers right across the region in every government sector. And we'll present to them what European business wants, and we hope that will then translate into regulatory change as well, and give them a greater understanding of what European businesses need to improve and increase their investments in Southeast Asia.
So what do you think success would look like for you coming out of this year's EU-ASEAN Business Summit? Any perhaps KPIs that you've set?
Success for us would be recognition that we're here to help, work with the region. We're not opposing the region in any way, sense or form. We would like to see ASEAN move ahead, and particularly on things that Malaysia's achieved this year, which is the finalisation of the upgrade of the ASEAN Trades in Goods Agreement. Get that signed, get it over the line, and start seeing the implementation rolling through. It'll make a big difference.
I do want to look beyond that as well. Also upcoming for ASEAN is, of course, the ASEAN Summit with a lot of big names coming into town. What do you think is on the agenda for the Council with the ASEAN Summit?
Well, one thing we're looking forward to is the potential for Timor-Leste to be joining ASEAN and expanding the family. And we look forward to that very, very much. The signing of the ASEAN Trading Goods Agreement announcement of significant progress on digital economy agreement, I think will be other big things for the region going forward.
And with the upcoming ASEAN summit in October, that of course wraps up Malaysia's chairmanship, its role as chairmanship of ASEAN. Your thoughts, I guess, on how Malaysia's been handling the region, and with a lot of uncertainty, of course, with US tariffs, with EU trade and whatnot. Just some of your general thoughts.
I think the first thing I would say is, in my time doing this role, which is over a decade now, Malaysia's always been the country which champions ASEAN and ASEAN integration the most. And I think the Prime Minister and his team this year have continued that theme. And they've been continuing that theme in actually very trying circumstances for them. You know, we've had issues around the world, Russia-Ukraine conflict, the conflict in Gaza, all those create political issues. We've had disputes between Cambodia and Thailand, of course, which PM Anwar has hopefully sorted out and settled with them during that special meetings he had with them. And of course, then we've had US trade policy, which has been hugely disruptive. And I think Malaysia, as chair of ASEAN this year, has done a great job of navigating all of those particular issues and disputes, certainly on the US trade policy side issue, bringing together the economic ministers and the finance ministers back in April, getting a joint statement out very, very quickly indeed, I think was remarkable.
Still a long way to go, of course, but I do want to still look to the future, and of course the groundwork has to be laid from now, with Philippines soon to assume chairmanship of ASEAN. Some of your expectations?
I think the Philippines will pick up the cudgels of much of what Malaysia's done. Philippines' prime job will to get the digital economy agreement over the line, finalised and signed next year, and then to do the building work for ASEAN's 60th anniversary coming up in 2027, where we hope, we pray that some of the stuff that's been announced this year on economic integration and the plan to that will start to show fruit in the ground.
All right, thank you so much. Plenty more we'd like to unpack, but that is the time that we have today on AWANI Global. That's Chris Humphrey. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
That's all on AWANI Global this week. With me, Nailah Huda. We'll catch you another time.